The rain in Crownwell City doesn't just fall, it seeps into the soul. It was doing a fine job of it tonight, slicking the asphalt outside Greyhaven Gate with an oily sheen that mirrored the bruised purple and neon orange of the flickering signs. My shift was over. 12 hours split between 2 lives by day, a part-time court clerk drowning in legalese and the scent of old paper at the 12th District Hall of Justice by night, a cleaner swabbing the very same floors, erasing the scuff marks of the city's endless, weary shuffle. Both jobs paid just enough to keep me in my tiny studio apartment and perpetually exhausted. My collar was turned up against the wind that whipped through the bus station's open bays, carrying the smell of diesel fumes and damp concrete. All I wanted was the squeal of my bus's air brakes, the hiss of its doors, and the lurching ride home. I fumbled in my thin coat pocket for my recorder, a cheap little silver thing I used for grocery lists and reminders. My brain, overloaded with case files and the chemical tang of floor polish, couldn't be trusted to remember milk. I pressed the record button, the tiny red light blinking to life. "Note to self," I mumbled, my voice swallowed by the city's drone. "Check on the appeal filing for—" That's when I heard them. 2 men, huddled under the narrow awning of the closed newsstand just a few feet away. They must have thought the rain and the rumble of a departing bus were enough cover. They were wrong. "The commission security chief is on board," the first voice grumbled, low and gravelly. He confirmed the witness statement for the Pier 7 fire has been amended. The new version points the finger straight at the Vale Circle. My blood ran cold. The Pier 7 arson case was the talk of the courthouse, a massive warehouse. Up in smoke, the Montclair Syndicate was the primary suspect. But now— "And the original recording?" the second voice asked. "Smoother, more dangerous?" "Erased. Kincaid at the IIC guarantees it. All we had to do was make sure his son's gambling debts disappeared." The Interstate Integrity Commission, the IIC, the supposed watchdogs. My breath hitched. This was more than just courthouse gossip. This was conspiracy, woven into the very fabric of the justice system I served. My cheap recorder was still on, its little red eye silently drinking in every poisonous word. They were talking about fabricating evidence, framing a rival outfit. The Vale Circle and the IIC was helping them do it. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the steady rhythm of the rain. I had to get away. I pressed the stop button, the red light dying, and shoved the recorder deep into my pocket. I took a step back, then another, trying to melt into the shadows. It was a foolish hope. A van, its license plates caked with mud, screeched to a halt at the curb, cutting me off. The side door slid open with a rattling groan. The 2 men from the newsstand were on me in an instant, their faces obscured by the hoods of their dark raincoats. One grabbed my arm, his grip like a vice. "You heard something you shouldn't have. Little bird," the gravelly one said, his breath sour. Panic, cold and absolute, seized me. The recorder, they knew. I didn't think, I just reacted. My hand shot into my pocket, and in a clumsy, desperate motion, I slipped the small device out and shoved it down into my worn-out sneaker, jamming it beneath the insole. It was a flimsy piece of plastic, but it felt as heavy as a gold bar. They were dragging me toward the van. My throat was tight, a scream trapped inside. This is it, I thought. This is how it ends. A nobody who overheard something she shouldn't have, disappearing into the wet, indifferent night. Just as my foot hit the van's running board, a blinding white light sliced through the darkness. A black sedan had pulled up behind the van, its headlights on full beam, freezing the scene like a photograph. The engine was so quiet I hadn't even heard it arrive. The driver's side door opened. A man stepped out, moving with an unnerving, fluid grace. He was tall, dressed in a perfectly tailored dark suit that seemed to repel the rain. He was flanked by 2 other men, equally imposing, who fanned out behind him in perfect, silent synchronicity. The man in the suit raised a hand, a simple gesture that commanded absolute silence. The men holding me froze. He took a few steps forward, his polished shoes splashing softly in a puddle. The harsh glare of the headlights carved his face from the shadows. High cheekbones, a strong jaw, and eyes that were the color of cold steel. There was an stillness about him, a coiled energy that made the air itself seem to crackle. I'd seen his face in hushed whispers and grainy surveillance photos tacked onto evidence boards, Cassian Vale, the enigmatic head of the Vale Circle, the very man Montclair and the IIC were trying to frame. He didn't speak. He simply lifted a sleek, dark object in his hand. There was a soft phut, barely audible over the rain. Then another. The van beside me lurched as both front tires deflated with a violent hiss. The man with the gravelly voice swore, letting go of me to reach inside his coat. Before he could, one of Vale's men moved with impossible speed, and I heard a sickening crunch followed by a groan. The second man shoved me hard into the side of the van and made a break for it, but he didn't get far before he was intercepted. It was brutally efficient, no shouting, no chaos, just a swift, silent reordering of the situation. I was left trembling, my back pressed against the cold metal of the disabled van, trying to choke back a sob that felt like it would tear me apart. The rain plastered my hair to my face, dripping into my eyes. Suddenly, the rain stopped falling on me. An umbrella, large and black, was being held over my head. Cassian Vale stood before me, so close I could see the fine weave of his suit. His steel-colored eyes scanned me from head to toe, an unreadable, calculating expression on his face. He wasn't looking at me like a person, he was looking at me like a problem he was solving. "You saw nothing tonight," he said. His voice was a low, calm baritone that cut through the noise of the city and my own frantic heartbeat. It held no warmth, only absolute authority. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a soft, black beanie, holding it out to me. "Cover your hair." I took it with a shaking hand, my fingers numb. I pulled it on, hiding the damp strands, feeling like a child being dressed for a storm. "Tomorrow," he continued, his gaze unwavering, "someone will guide you to file your report at the right place." My eyes darted past him, searching for an escape I knew didn't exist. Over his shoulder, reflected in a large puddle on the broken pavement, was the distorted image of a poster plastered on a nearby wall. It was an ad for civic duty, featuring a grand photo of my workplace, the 12th District Hall of Justice. The reflection shimmered, the words seeming to mock me. Fate had a cruel sense of humor. I took a stumbling step backward, my instincts screaming at me to run, to flee from this man and the violence that radiated from him like a cold aura. Just as I did, the mournful blare of a freight train's horn echoed from the North Key Bridge, a lonely sound that vibrated through my bones. "Don't," Cassian Vale said, his voice dropping even lower. He hadn't moved, but his eyes had flickered down to my coat. "They tagged you." Before I could process what he meant, he was shrugging out of his suit jacket. The motion was smooth, effortless. In one fluid movement, he draped the heavy, expensive fabric over my shoulders. It was still warm from his body, smelling faintly of sandalwood and something else, something metallic and clean like the rain. His fingers brushed against my elbow as he settled the coat. A light, almost imperceptible touch meant to guide, not to hold, yet it sent a jolt through me, a strange and confusing mix of fear and security. It was a gesture of protection, and I didn't know what to do with it. One of his men opened the rear door of the sedan. Cassian guided me toward it with that same light pressure on my elbow. I got in without protest, my will completely eroded. The door closed with a solid, final thud, sealing me inside the silent, leather-scented interior. The car pulled away from the curb smoothly, accelerating into the night. I twisted around in my seat, looking through the rear window. The scene was already receding, a tableau of urban decay. The disabled van sat under a flickering street lamp, one of its windows shattered. I could see a faint wisp of smoke curling from under the hood, a tiny spark in the gloom. The relentless rain was already working to extinguish it, washing the scene clean. I faced forward, hugging my backpack to my chest. Cassian Vale sat beside me, staring straight ahead, his profile as stern and unmoving as a statue. He didn't ask me what I heard. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't ask for my trust. He simply reached into an interior pocket of his vest and produced a small, featureless burner phone. He placed it on my lap. The plastic was cool against my jeans. "There are 2 numbers in it," he said, his voice even. "If they get to you first, call the first number. If it's me, the second." They, the IIC, the corrupt agents of justice, or him, the criminal underworld, a choice between 2 different kinds of darkness. I stared at the phone, my mind reeling. I clutched my backpack tighter, the straps digging into my fingers, inside the insole of my shoe. The cheap plastic recorder felt like it was burning a hole through my skin. It held a secret that could topple giants, and I was just a small girl caught in the path of their fall. As the car sped through the glistening streets, we passed a clear vantage point of the city's skyline. In the distance, one building stood out, a monolithic tower of glass and steel, blazing with light against the midnight sky. Every single floor was illuminated, a beacon of sleepless vigilance, the headquarters of the Interstate Integrity Commission, a place where the lights never went out, because secrets, I was beginning to learn, were afraid of the dark. And in a city like Crownwell, truth doesn't die. It just learns to wear a bulletproof vest. Daylight was a liar. It streamed through the grimy windows of my studio apartment in Dockline, promising normalcy, pretending the rain-slicked terror of the previous night had never happened. I had been dropped a few blocks away an hour before dawn, clutching the burner phone and wrapped in a coat that cost more than my rent. Cassian Vale had disappeared as silently as he had arrived, leaving me with the ghost of his presence and the heavy weight of a secret I never wanted. The first lie of the day was the splintered wood around the lock on my apartment door. It had been forced, not with brute strength, but with a clinical precision that was somehow more violating. My heart, which had just begun to settle into a nervous rhythm, started its frantic hammering again. I pushed the door open, my hand trembling. The studio was exactly as I had left it, a testament to my obsessively neat habits, except for one thing. On my small, second-hand kitchen table, placed perfectly in the center, was a crisp, manila envelope. The logo embossed in the corner was stark and official, a stylized eagle over the letters IIC. Below it, in severe block letters, invitation to cooperate, witness division. "Miss Calder." The voice came from the corner of the room, by the window. I jumped, a strangled gasp escaping my lips. A man stood there, his bulk seeming to shrink my tiny apartment even further. He wore the tan and brown uniform of the Eastbridge Sheriff's Division, but he was no one I recognized from the courthouse beat. His face was bland, his expression neutral, but his eyes didn't blink enough. He held his hat in his hands, a posture meant to be disarming that only heightened my alarm. "We were concerned when you didn't return home last night," he said, his tone perfectly modulated, as if he were reading from a script. "There was a report of a disturbance at the Greyhaven Gate terminal. We're here to ensure your safety. The Interstate Integrity Commission would like to offer you full protection." Protection. The word sounded obscene coming from him. He gestured toward the envelope on the table. "That's a preliminary agreement. It outlines the terms of your voluntary cooperation. Once you sign, we can move you to a secure location." My mind raced. The IAC, Kincaid, the doctored testimony. This wasn't protection, it was a cage. They wanted to bury me and my recording under layers of official paperwork. Just then, a vibration against my hip, the burner phone. I pulled it from the pocket of Cassian's coat, which I was still wearing, my own thin jacket feeling like a distant memory. The screen lit up with a single text message, 2 words. "Don't sign anything." The message wasn't signed, but it didn't need to be. The authority in those 2 words was absolute. I looked from the phone in my hand to the placid, unblinking sheriff's deputy. I was caught. A badge on one side, a shadow on the other. Both wanted the same thing, the tiny piece of plastic nestled against the sole of my foot. One wanted to destroy it, the other to wield it, and I was trapped squarely in the middle, a pawn in a game I was only just beginning to understand. "I need some time to think," I said, my voice barely a whisper. The deputy's smile was thin and meaningless. "Of course, but don't take too long. Crownwell can be a dangerous city for someone with valuable information." It was a perfectly polite threat. He gave a nod that was more of a twitch and let himself out, the click of the door echoing in the sudden silence. I needed help. Real help. My first thought was Lantern and Loom, the non-profit legal aid center where I clerked. It was a place of fierce, underfunded justice, run by people who believed in the law as a shield for the powerless, not a weapon for the corrupt. I would talk to Mr. Abernathy, my supervising attorney. He would know what to do. An hour later, I stood on the pavement outside the converted brick warehouse that housed our offices, my hopes turning to ash in my mouth. Yellow tape, stark and official, was stretched across the double glass doors. A large, circular seal was plastered in the center, bearing an eagle even more imposing than the IIC's. Federal Commerce Security Directorate, the text read. Access restricted pending financial audit. Financial audit? We barely had a budget to audit. This was a shutdown, a warning. They knew where I would go, who I would trust, and they had cut me off at the knees before I could even take a step. The isolation was a physical thing, a cold dread that started in my stomach and spread through my limbs. I tried my email on my phone. Access denied. User credentials invalid. I walked to the employee entrance at the side of the building and swiped my keycard. The light on the reader stayed red. I was locked out of my own life. Then came the final, cruelest twist. I pulled up the internal employee message board, a place usually reserved for potluck announcements and birthday wishes. There was a new post from an anonymous user. The headline was Concerns Regarding Evidence Integrity. The post, written in carefully neutral language, spoke of an unnamed junior clerk with a history of emotional instability who had been heard making unsubstantiated claims and might be attempting to fabricate evidence for personal gain. It didn't name me, but it didn't have to. It was a smear, a preemptive strike designed to utterly destroy my credibility. They were not just silencing me, they were erasing me. There was only one option left. I couldn't trust the law, and I couldn't trust my colleagues not to be swayed by the poison being dripped into their ears. I had to secure the evidence myself. The Northlight Public Library was my only refuge. It was vast, anonymous, and filled with the quiet hum of public access computers. I found a secluded carrel in the back, the air thick with the smell of old books and dust, with trembling fingers. I took off my sneaker, pulled out the insole, and retrieved the recorder. It felt warm, alive with its dangerous secret. I plugged it into the computer, my eyes darting around the cavernous room. Every cough, every rustle of a turning page sent a fresh jolt of paranoia through me. I wasn't just being paranoid. 3 men had entered the library shortly after I did. They weren't reading, they were watching, pretending to browse the shelves, their gazes lingering on me a second too long. One of them walked past my carrel, muttering just loud enough for me to hear, "Don't make this hard on yourself, sweetheart." Montclair's thugs, less subtle than the IIC, but just as deadly. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely control the mouse. I remembered Cassian's words. If they get to you first, call the first number. If it's me, the second. This wasn't the IIC. This was them. I pulled out the burner phone and, shielding it with my body, dialed the second number. It rang twice before a woman's voice, crisp and professional, answered. Location. Northlight Public Library, 2nd floor, rear carrels, I whispered, my voice cracking. Stay there. 5 minutes. The line went dead. True to her word, 4 minutes later, a woman slid into the chair opposite me. She was striking, with dark, intelligent eyes and black hair pulled back in a severe bun. She wore a leather motorcycle jacket and carried nothing but a small, metallic USB drive. She moved with the same quiet confidence as Cassian Vale, but without his chilling stillness. She was energy and purpose. "I'm Noor," she said, her voice low. "Let's get that file safe." She took over the computer, her fingers flying across the keyboard with practiced ease. She ignored the men lingering in the stacks. "They won't make a move in here. Too many cameras." She plugged in her encrypted drive. "We're going to make a cold copy, completely offline, untraceable. Then we're going to mail it." She showed me how to copy the raw audio file, run a checksum to verify its integrity, and then encrypt the entire package. "The original recording is your life insurance. This copy is our opening move." She handed me a pre-addressed internal courthouse mailer. The recipient was a specific obscure clerk's office, intake, Magistrate Division 12B. "They'll log it as a miscellaneous evidentiary submission without an active case number," Noor explained. "It'll sit in a secure locker, buried in bureaucracy until we call it up. No digital footprint, no way to trace it back to you today." It was brilliant, using the system's own ponderous, complex machinery against itself. "Why?" I finally asked, the question that had been burning in my mind since last night. "Why is he helping me?" Noor paused her work, her dark eyes meeting mine. There was no pity in them, only a frank assessment. Montclair and the IIC were planning to use a fabricated testimony to pin the Pier 7 fire on the Vale Circle. "Your recording doesn't just prove they bribed an official, it proves our innocence. This time, Ava, the truth helps him too." The honesty of it was disarming. This wasn't charity. It was a strategic alliance I had stumbled into. As I moved the cursor to finalize the encrypted file, my hand started to tremble again, the weight of it all crashing down on me. Noor reached across the table and placed her hand gently over mine. Her skin was cool, her grip firm and steady. It wasn't a gesture of intimacy, but of solidarity, a silent acknowledgement of the fear I felt, and a reassurance that I wasn't entirely alone in it. After we dropped the mailer into an interoffice deposit box in the library's basement, Noor walked me to the exit. "Go home, lock your door, and wait," she said, before swinging a leg over a sleek black motorcycle and roaring off into the afternoon traffic, disappearing as quickly as she had arrived. That night, sleep was a stranger. I lay awake in my apartment, the sounds of the city outside a poor substitute for comfort. For the first time, I understood that the most terrifying threats aren't loud. They don't always come with shouted threats or the screech of tires. Sometimes, fear is the quiet click of a lock being picked. It's the yellow tape across a door, the silent smear of your name on a computer screen. It's a legal fear, and it breathes right down the back of your neck. A thought, cold and clear, surfaced in my exhausted mind. No one comes to save you twice. Cassian Vale had intervened once, but I couldn't depend on a phantom in the rain. I had to find my own footing. And yet, as I finally drifted into a fitful sleep, the image that came to me was of a pair of steel-colored eyes, watching me from the darkness, steady and unblinking. The next morning, an official email, which had miraculously bypassed my locked account, was waiting for me. It was from the clerk of court for the 12th District. Notice of preliminary hearing in the matter of the Pier 7 arson investigation. A preliminary evidentiary hearing has been scheduled for Thursday, December 5th at 090 a.m. in Courtroom C. Your presence is required. Witness designation. 07, the night before the hearing. The city held its breath. Then, it exhaled into darkness. One moment. My small apartment was bathed in the familiar orange glow of Crownwell's streetlights. The next, it was plunged into an absolute disorienting blackness. Not just my building, the entire Riverline district was dead. The hum of my refrigerator, the buzz of the neon sign across the street, the distant city drone, all gone. The silence that rushed in was heavier than any sound. My first thought was a simple power failure. A a common occurrence in the city's aging infrastructure. But the burner phone in my pocket buzzed with a different explanation. It was a text from a number I now knew belonged to Noor. "This isn't a blackout, it's a curtain. They're hunting. Stay put, we're coming." The words sent a sliver of ice through my veins. A curtain, a stage set for a final, desperate act. I was the star, and I had no desire to play the part. I stood frozen in the center of my tiny room, my eyes straining against the blackness. Every creak of the old building was magnified, every distant shout a potential threat. My own breathing was a roar in my ears. I heard it before I saw it, a soft scuff of a shoe in the hallway outside my door. Then another. They were here. I backed away from the door, my hands outstretched, fumbling for something, anything to use as a weapon. My fingers found the cold, hard spine of a law textbook. It was pathetic. The doorknob began to turn, slowly, testing the lock. I held my breath, my knuckles white on the book, but they didn't force it. Instead, I heard them move away, their footsteps receding down the hall. A false alarm. A moment of relief washed over me, so potent it made me dizzy. It was a trap. The sharp metallic slam of the stairwell fire door bursting open jolted me back to reality. They hadn't been at my door. They had been blocking the only way out. The emergency lights in the hallway flickered on, casting a strobing, sickly red glow through my peephole. I had to move. There was a fire escape, but it was at the far end of the hall. I took a deep breath, unlocked my door, and slipped out, praying the dim, flashing lights would offer some cover. The hallway was empty. I ran, my cheap sneakers silent on the worn linoleum. I reached the stairwell at the opposite end of the building and pulled the heavy door open, plunging into the concrete echo chamber. I took the steps 2 at a time, my only thought to get to the ground floor and disappear into the blacked-out streets. I made it down 1 flight before a figure emerged from the shadows on the landing below, blocking my path. Another appeared on the stairs above me. I was caught. The strobing emergency light illuminated the face of the man below me. It was one of the men from the library, his expression a flat, predatory calm. He took a step up. "Give us the chip, little bird," he whispered, the sound slithering up the stairwell. "The little silver recorder. Hand it over, and you get to keep breathing." My blood turned to ice. My hand instinctively went to my pocket, where the small device now felt like a block of lead. It was the original, my only leverage, my life insurance, as Noor had called it. "I don't know what you're talking about," I stammered, my voice sounding weak and foreign to my own ears. He chuckled, a low, ugly sound. "Don't play dumb. We know you have it." He started up the stairs, his partner descending from above, closing the vise. This was it. No headlights this time. No silent sedan, just a concrete tomb and 2 men who would take what they wanted and leave me behind. Suddenly, the fire door on the landing I was on swung open with a loud bang, slamming against the concrete wall. A figure stood silhouetted against the dim red light of the hallway, Cassian Vale. He didn't have a weapon in his hand. He didn't say a word. He just moved. The man coming down the stairs lunged toward him, and Cassian stepped inside his reach, a blur of motion. There was a sharp, precise strike, and the man crumpled, his arm bending at an angle it wasn't meant to. The man below me froze for a split second. Reaching inside his coat, Cassian was already moving, closing the distance in 2 long strides. He twisted the man's wrist, and I heard a sharp clatter as a knife spun across the concrete floor. Another swift, brutal movement, and the second man was down, groaning, clutching his knee. It was over in less than 5 seconds. No overt violence, just a chillingly efficient dismantling of the threat. The only sounds were the soft thuds of the impacts and the clatter of the dropped weapon. Cassian turned to me, his face an unreadable mask in the flashing red light. He pointed up, to the roof, now. He led the way, his steps sure and silent. I followed without question, my legs moving on pure adrenaline. We emerged onto the flat, tar-covered roof, and the city opened up around us. The wind was a physical force, tearing at my clothes, whipping my hair across my face. The blackout was complete, a vast blanket of darkness punctuated by the pinpricks of car headlights moving like lost fireflies on the streets below. Cars, several of them, circling my block like sharks. The height was dizzying. My stomach lurched, and I stumbled back from the edge, a wave of vertigo washing over me. Cassian was instantly at my side, his body a solid wall against the wind. He didn't touch me, but his presence was a shield. He unwound a dark wool scarf from his own neck and wrapped it around mine, tucking the ends into my coat. The wool was soft and warm against my cold skin. "Trust the next step," he said, his voice low and steady, just loud enough to be heard over the gale. I looked where he was pointing and saw it. The low hum was what I noticed first. A small, dark drone, no bigger than a hawk, hovered silently a few feet from the edge of the roof, its single red optical lens glowing faintly. It dipped its nose in a signal. Below us. The side of the building was covered in a massive web of scaffolding, shrouded in green construction tarps. "We go down," he said simply. Before I could protest, he was moving, swinging his legs over the parapet and finding a foothold on the scaffolding's metal frame. He held a hand out to me. "I won't let you fall." I closed my eyes, took his hand. His grip was like iron, and followed him over the edge. The descent was a terrifying, controlled slide. We moved down the outside of the scaffolding, our feet finding purchase on the crossbeams, the tarp flapping wildly around us. We landed with a jolt in the narrow, trash-filled alley behind an old, forgotten-looking building. A heavy steel gate groaned open, and Noor stepped out, a small flashlight in her hand. "Clean," she said, her eyes scanning the rooftops above us before she ushered us inside. We were in an old print shop. The air was thick with the rich, chemical smell of ink and paper and solvent. Huge, dormant printing presses stood in rows like sleeping iron beasts. The low, rhythmic hum of a ventilation system was a strangely calming sound after the chaos of the escape. This was Moonletter Press, a Vale Circle safe house. They had the building wired. Noor reported to Cassian, her voice all business. "Tracked her heat signature to the stairwell. We cut their feed just before you went in." Cassian nodded, his eyes scanning the space. He turned to me. He pulled a thin plastic card from his wallet. It looked exactly like the witness passes we issued at the courthouse. "This will get you through the primary security checkpoint tomorrow morning," he said. He wasn't making a promise of safety, only a statement of fact. "You'll have eyes on your back the entire time." My gaze drifted past him to a massive corkboard on the wall. It was covered with a detailed map of Crownwell City, but it wasn't a street map. It was a map of systems. Red lines indicated power grids, blue for sewer and water mains, yellow for fiber optic cables. The city's surveillance camera sightlines were meticulously traced in green. This wasn't a gang, it was a living, breathing intelligence network woven into the very bones of the city. Noor came over and handed me a folded garment. It was a simple, classic navy blue blazer. "In a courtroom, fabric is armor," she said with a small, wry smile. "Look the part." I took it, the wool blend feeling substantial in my hands. I looked at Cassian. He stood a few feet away, a deliberate, respectful distance. He hadn't touched me since he'd helped me over the ledge. That careful space he maintained felt more reassuring than any empty promise. Why me? The question escaped my lips before I could stop it. It was more than just about the recording. Why this elaborate, dangerous rescue? He met my gaze, and for the first time, I saw something flicker in those steel-colored eyes, not warmth. Exactly, but something akin to understanding. "Because you weren't born to be silent," he said. The wail of a fire truck siren cut through the night, growing closer. Noor moved instantly to a control panel on the wall and killed the lights inside the shop, plunging us into near darkness, illuminated only by the faint glow of the city's underbelly through a grimy skylight. Through the front windows, we saw them a procession of dark sedans, sweeping past the alley, their headlights cutting through the darkness like searchlights, Montclair's hunters, passing by like ghosts. My hand went to my pocket, my fingers closing around the hard plastic of the recorder. It felt like a second heart, beating a frantic rhythm against my leg. I looked from the passing cars to Cassian's silhouette in the gloom. I gave a single, firm nod. "I'll be there," I said, my voice clearer, stronger than it had been all night. "I'll go to the court." Cassian's voice came out of the darkness, a low, resonant promise that settled deep in my bones. "I'll be in the back row." The rain started again, a soft, steady drumming on the tin roof of Moonletter Press. It was a gentle sound, a world away from the violent, oil-slick downpour I'd been born into this nightmare under. But my body hadn't gotten the message. A fine tremor ran through me, a stubborn aftershock of adrenaline and the biting cold of the night. Nor, ever perceptive, seemed to understand. Without a word, she moved to a small kitchenette tucked in a corner behind a towering flatbed press. A few moments later, the rich scent of chocolate filled the air. She placed a steaming ceramic mug in my hands, her fingers briefly brushing mine in a gesture of quiet support. "The back entrance is secure," she said to Cassian. "I'll run a perimeter sweep." She gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod and then slipped out a side door, leaving us alone in the cavernous, ink-scented silence. The warmth of the mug was a small anchor in the swirling chaos of my thoughts. Cassian watched me for a long moment, his steel-gray eyes reflecting the single, warm-toned work lamp Nor had left on. He took off his suit jacket, the one he draped over me in the alley, which I'd since given back and hung it carefully on a hook. The simple act of removing it seemed to strip away a layer of his authority, leaving behind the man rather than the myth. He gestured to a worn, wooden stool beside a massive, cast-iron letterpress. "Sit," he said. It wasn't a command, but a soft invitation. I obeyed, sinking onto the stool, my legs feeling unsteady. The whole space, with its rugged, industrial honesty, felt safer than my own locked apartment. The silence stretched, filled only by the rain and the hum of the ventilation. It was a comfortable silence, not an awkward one, but it was my own turmoil that finally broke it. "I'm scared," I confessed, the words a raw whisper. I stared into the dark surface of the hot cocoa. Not just of them. I'm scared of the trial tomorrow, of what they'll do, what they'll say. I'm scared of losing myself in all of this, of becoming just a piece of evidence. Witness designation number 7. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He didn't say, "You'll be fine." Instead, he pulled up another stool, the scrape of its legs on the concrete floor the only sharp sound in the room. He sat, not too close, and leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "When I was a kid," he began, his voice low and resonant, "I grew up over in Block 19. My mother was a cook at a little place called Palermo Dream. She worked 16-hour days. Her hands always smelled of garlic and oregano. She taught me a lot, but the most important lesson was this Cassian. She'd say, 'Learn to be quiet when the city is screaming. That's when you can hear what's real.'" I looked up at him, surprised by the glimpse into a past I couldn't have imagined. Block 19 was one of the roughest districts in Crownwell, and in his mother's words, I heard the echo of his own unnerving stillness, the source of his quiet power. A small, involuntary laugh escaped me. It was a fragile, watery sound, but it was genuine. My mother just told me to always file my taxes on time. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, a barely there shift that transformed his severe features. That's also good advice. The small moment of shared humor dissolved the last of the tension between us. He was just a man who'd had a mother, who'd grown up in a tough neighborhood, and I was just a woman who was terrified. He shifted slightly on his stool, closing the small distance between us. He reached out, not to touch my face or my arm, but laid his hand on the table beside my mug. Slowly, tentatively, his fingers brushed against the back of my hand. The touch was electric, a spark of warmth that had nothing to do with the cocoa. My breath hitched. He didn't move any closer. His gaze locked on mine, asking a silent question. My heart hammered against my ribs, a wild, frantic rhythm. I didn't pull away. Instead, I turned my hand over, my palm facing up in a silent invitation. He took it, his fingers laced through mine, his hand strong and warm and calloused. He leaned in, and the world seemed to shrink to the space between our faces. The scent of rain and sandalwood and the faint, clean smell of his skin filled my senses. His kiss was impossibly gentle. It wasn't a kiss of passion or possession, but of quiet affirmation. It was a promise. A moment of profound calm in the heart of the storm. It said, "I see you. You are not alone." My free hand came up to rest on his shoulder, and I felt the solid muscle beneath his shirt. His other hand moved to my back, resting gently in the small of it, a grounding pressure that steadied my trembling frame. There was a brief, flickering moment of doubt in my mind. This was Cassian Vale, a man who lived in a world of violence and shadows. I must have tensed, because he started to pull back, his expression unreadable, ready to give me the space I needed, but I didn't want space. I wanted this. I leaned in again, closing the last inch between us, and his lips met mine once more, a soft sigh escaping him. When we finally broke apart, we just looked at each other, our breathing slightly uneven, in his eyes. I saw not the cold steel of a crime boss, but the deep, quiet loneliness of a man who understood what it was to be hunted. "After," I whispered, the word hanging in the air. "After the trial." He nodded slowly. "After the trial." "Breakfast," I said, a faint, hopeful smile on my face. "At the Pitcher's Diner. They have cinnamon roll pancakes that are probably illegal in 3 states. "And then," he countered, his thumb stroking the back of my hand, "we'll rent bicycles, the cheap, rickety kind, and ride them along the Oriole River, all the way to the old lighthouse." We talked like that for what felt like hours, whispering about a future that seemed as fantastical as a fairy tale, a life filled with simple, normal things, a life without burner phones and midnight escapes. The spell was broken by the sharp, intrusive buzz of a phone, not mine. Cassian pulled his from his pocket, his expression immediately hardening, the commander returning in an instant. It was Noor. "Yes," he said, his voice clipped. He listened, his jaw tightening. "How wide is the net?" Another pause. "Understood. Keep the feeds active." He ended the call and looked at me, the brief softness in his eyes gone, replaced by tactical coldness. That was Noor. The IIC just issued an emergency summons for a Jane Doe witness, matching your description, and the FCSD filed a motion to get access to all security footage from the library and your apartment building for the last 48 hours. They're closing in. He stood up, all business again, and walked to the massive map on the wall, his mind already calculating routes and possibilities. The brief, beautiful fantasy of pancakes and bike rides evaporated. A stray drop of water, left over from the rain, trickled down my cheek from my still, damp hairline. Cassian turned back, saw it, and for a second, the commander softened. He crossed the room, plucked a coarse paper towel from a dispenser by a sink, and gently, so gently, dabbed the moisture from my skin. A small gesture, a tiny crack in the armor, but it meant everything. "The recording," I said, my voice firm, finding a strength I didn't know I possessed. "The original. I'm keeping it. It's the only thing that's truly mine in all of this." He looked at me, a long, appraising gaze. I expected him to argue, to insist he keep it for safekeeping. Instead, he gave a slow, deliberate nod. "You're right," he said. "Power belongs to the one who holds the truth." The heat from a large industrial paper dryer in the corner kicked on, sending a wave of warmth through the chilly space. I stood up and walked over to him, my fear not gone, but changed. It was no longer a formless monster. It now had a purpose. I rested my forehead against his shoulder, closing my eyes and breathed in the smell of the old print shop, the rich, earthy scent of ink, a smell of words and facts that couldn't be erased or twisted. We didn't talk about sleeping, but the exhaustion was a heavy blanket on us both. There was a worn-out sofa against one wall, its upholstery faded. It would have to do. As I settled into one corner, pulling his heavy suit coat over me for warmth, he remained standing, a silent guardian in the gloom. "Tomorrow," he said, his voice a low murmur that wrapped around me like a shield. "I'll only be in the back row, but every exit, every hallway, every emergency stairwell, they're already locked tight for the bad guys." I closed my eyes, the rhythmic drumming of the rain on the roof a steady lullaby. For the first time since this began, I believed him, and I believed that maybe, just maybe, fear wasn't something you had to suffocate. Maybe it was just something you had to teach how to breathe. Dawn broke over Crownwell not with a gentle blush, but with a hard, metallic glare. It was the kind of morning that promised scrutiny, from the window of the Moonletter Press. I watched the city wake up, its arteries of traffic beginning to pulse with a relentless, indifferent energy. I was dressed in the armor Nor had given me, a simple white blouse and the dark navy blazer. The fabric felt substantial, a shield against the eyes and accusations that awaited me. The steps of the 12th District Hall of Justice were a chaotic sea of cameras and microphones. News vans lined the curb, their satellite dishes pointed at the sky like supplicants. The whispers I'd heard in the courthouse hallways for weeks had erupted into a full-throated roar. The Pier 7 fire, the Vale Montclair war. I was the fuse, walking calmly toward the dynamite. Cashin's witness pass felt cool and foreign in my clammy hand. I kept my head down, my eyes fixed on the granite steps in front of me, and pushed through the throng. The security guard at the metal detector was a man I recognized, a weary veteran named Frank. He glanced at my pass. His eyes flickered with a brief, unreadable expression, and he waved me through without a word. I was inside. The air was cool and still, smelling of floor wax and the faint, dusty scent of justice. Courtroom C was exactly as I remembered it from my clerk duties, yet it felt entirely alien. The polished wood of the benches, the imposing height of the judge's dais, the perfectly aligned stacks of legal pads, it was all designed to project an aura of unassailable order. Today, I knew it was a stage for chaos. I took my seat at the witness stand. The IIC's prosecutor, a man named Elias Vance with slicked-back hair and a smile that never reached his eyes, gave me a look meant to be reassuring. "Just tell the truth. Miss Calder," he said, his voice oozing a synthetic sympathy. "We're all on the same side here." I knew he was lying. On the other side of the room, Marcus Thorne, Montclair's lead counsel, smirked at me. He was a shark in a $1,000 suit, all sharp angles and predatory stillness. The proceedings began. Vance led me through the basic facts of my employment, my schedule on the night in question. It was all procedural, a slow tightening of the narrative noose. Then it was Thorne's turn. He approached the stand, his movements slow and deliberate. "Miss Calder," he began, his voice a condescending purr. "Is it true that you have a history of filing workplace complaints that you've been formally disciplined for? And I quote, embellishing facts for dramatic effect." The attack was so sudden, so personal, it almost threw me. He was referencing a stupid minor dispute from 2 years ago when I'd exaggerated a plumbing issue in the clerk's office. But here, in this room, he made it sound like I was a pathological liar. My time as a court clerk, however, had taught me one valuable lesson: how to trim the fat from language, how to answer only the question that was asked. "I filed a complaint about a leak that was damaging court documents," I said, my voice even, betraying none of the turmoil inside me. "The issue was resolved." He waved a dismissive hand. "Of course. Now, about the night of the alleged disturbance at the bus station. You claim you were accosted, frightened, and then what happened?" "A stranger intervened," I said, keeping my gaze fixed on the judge. "A kind stranger helped me get away safely." Thorne smiled, a wide, vicious thing, A kind stranger, how fortunate. A knight in shining armor appearing out of the rain. He turned and walked back to his table, picking up a glossy photograph. Your Honor, I'd like to present People's Exhibit A. He placed the photo on the projector. An image flashed onto the large screen behind me. It was me, standing in the doorway of the Moonletter Press, the silhouette of a printing press visible behind me. It was grainy, clearly taken from a distance with a telephoto lens, but it was unmistakably me. And it was unmistakably a place I should not have been. A wave of murmurs rippled through the courtroom. My carefully constructed composure fractured, my breath caught in my throat. They had a mole. Someone had seen us. My eyes, wide with panic, scanned the public gallery. I searched the rows of faces, the reporters, the curious onlookers, and then I found him. He was in the back row, just as he'd promised. Cassian, he wasn't looking at me. He was looking at his hands, as if he were just another bored citizen. But then, for a fraction of a second, his head lifted and our eyes met. He didn't smile. He didn't react. He just gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was a transfer of will, a silent command. Continue. I took a deep, shuddering breath and turned back to the judge. The panic receded, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. Your Honor, I said, my voice ringing with a newfound strength. In light of Mr. Thorne's exhibit, which proves only that I was seeking shelter from dangerous men, I believe it's appropriate to introduce my own evidence. Thorne's smirk faltered. Vance looked confused. I have in my possession a digital audio file, I announced, looking directly at the court reporter. It is a copy of a recording I made at the Greyhaven Gate bus terminal on the night in question. The courtroom fell silent. I explained that the file was on an encrypted USB drive in my pocket. The judge, a stern, intelligent woman named Marion Shaw, ordered the bailiff to retrieve it. As the file was loaded onto the court system, I could feel the atmosphere shift. The tension was a physical thing, a high-frequency hum in the air. Judge Shaw's voice cut through the silence. Play the file. The scratchy, low-fidelity recording filled the pristine courtroom. First my own voice, mumbling about a grocery list, then the other voices, low and conspiratorial. The commission security chief is on board. The witness statement for the Pier 7 fire has been amended. The new version points the finger straight at the veil circle. Erased. Kincaid at the IIC guarantees it. Elias Vance, the IIC prosecutor, went pale. Thorne's face was a mask of fury. The recording ended. The silence that followed was deafening. Miss Calder, Judge Shaw said, her voice dangerously calm. This is an extraordinary claim. Can you authenticate this recording? Can you prove this copy has not been tampered with? This was the moment. Yes, Your Honor, I said, my clerk training taking over. The original recording device has not left my possession. This copy was created on a public computer at the Northlight Public Library to prevent digital tracking. A checksum hash was generated to verify the file's integrity against the original. The encrypted drive was then sealed in an internal courthouse mailer and deposited into the inner office mail system, addressed to Magistrate Division 12B, where it was logged as a miscellaneous submission and has remained in a secure facility until today. I used the language of my job, the simple, boring language of procedure, and it was more powerful than any dramatic accusation. It was the undeniable truth of bureaucracy. Objection! Vance was on his feet, his composure shattered. This is procedural nonsense. This evidence is unverified, inadmissible. Before the judge could rule, the main doors of the courtroom swung open. A man strode in, his expression harried but determined. It was Mr. Abernathy, my old boss from Lantern and Loom. Your Honor, my apologies for the interruption, he said, his voice filling the room. My firm was under an unfortunate and, it now seems, entirely baseless federal audit. The seal was just lifted an hour ago. I am here to represent Miss Ava Calder. A lawyer. A real lawyer. My lawyer. A wave of relief so profound it almost made me weep washed over me. while Thorne and Vance erupted in a flurry of furious objections. I felt the burner phone vibrate in my pocket. I risked a glance. A text from Cassian's number. "Satlock, team approaching West Door." My blood ran cold. They weren't just fighting me in here. They were moving outside, too. Enough. Judge Shaw's voice cracked like a whip. The lawyers fell silent. "Mr. Thorne, your motion for a recess is denied. Mr. Vance, your objection is noted and, for now, overruled. Mr. Abernathy, welcome. This court orders a temporary protective detail for this witness." She looked past the IIC prosecutor, her eyes landing on the uniformed bailiffs. "The Civic Hall Marshal Service will take charge of Miss Calder's security during the recess. The IIC will stand down." It was a stunning rebuke, a clear signal that the judge smelled the same corruption I did. I looked down at the witness stand, and my own hands clasped tightly in my lap, in my pocket. I could feel the small, hard outline of the cheap plastic recorder, a $10 device, now the key to a $1 million conspiracy. I risked a glance at the back row. Cassian was looking down, calmly writing on a small notepad, the picture of a disinterested observer, but I knew better. I could feel his gaze, a tangible presence, watching the emergency exit to his left, covering every angle, every shadow. Judge Shaw banged her gavel. "We will recess for lunch. Reconvene at 2 o'clock sharp." The room exploded into noise. Reporters shouted questions. "Mr. Abernathy rushed to my side. 2 uniformed marshals, their faces stern and professional, formed a protective wall around me. As they escorted me toward a side door leading to the courthouse's secure corridors, a figure brushed past me in the throng. It was a young clerk, someone I'd seen 100 times, his face a bland mask of anonymity. He didn't look at me, but his whisper was a shard of ice in my ear. "Don't turn around. The IIC can't protect you from themselves." The midday sun hit the courthouse steps like a physical blow, a harsh, unforgiving glare after the cool dimness of the courtroom. The 2 Civic Hall marshals flanked me, their presence a solid, reassuring wall against the jostling reporters. Mr. Abernathy was at my elbow, whispering legal strategy, but my mind was still echoing with the clerk's whispered warning. The IEC can't protect you from themselves. As we reached the bottom of the steps, a black sedan with government plates pulled up to the curb. 2 men in crisp, dark suits got out. They had the same bland, professional faces as every federal agent I'd ever seen. One of them approached the lead marshal, flashing an IIC badge. "Deputy Director Kincaid's orders," the agent said, his voice devoid of emotion. "We're taking lead on the witness transport to the safe house. We'll handle her from here." The marshal frowned, looking from the IIC badge to me. My orders from Judge Shaw were explicit. The Marshal Service has custody. "And we're not disputing the judge's order," the second agent said smoothly, opening the rear door of the sedan. "This is a coordinated interagency effort. We have the secure vehicle ready. It's a cleaner transfer this way, less of a scene." It all sounded so plausible, so official. Even Mr. Abernathy seemed to hesitate, caught in the web of jurisdictional courtesy. Before he could protest further, the first agent had a hand on my arm, a firm but polite pressure guiding me toward the car. "Miss Calder, if you'll come with us, we need to get you off the street." I got in. It was a mistake, and a deep, primal part of me knew it. But to resist would have caused the very scene they claimed to be avoiding. The marshals, duty-bound but clearly uncertain, watched as the door closed, sealing me inside. The interior was cool and smelled of clean leather. For a moment, a foolish, fleeting moment, I felt safe. The car pulled smoothly into traffic, following the standard route toward the federal safe houses downtown. Then, it signaled for a right turn where there should have been none. It swung onto a ramp leading toward the industrial district, the part of the city that bled into the port. A quiet, final click echoed from all 4 doors as the central locks engaged. This was it, A legal kidnapping. My heart, which had been beating a steady, nervous rhythm, began to pound against my ribs like a trapped bird. My breath hitched. I reached into my pocket, my fingers closing around the burner phone. I couldn't make a call. They would hear. But Noor and I had established a simple protocol. I pressed the power button to wake the screen and tapped out a new text message, my thumb shaking, a single period, followed by 2 dashes, a simple code, distress, they have me. I hit send, praying it went through, praying she was watching. The car drove on, deeper into the labyrinthine world of the Crownwell Port Authority. We finally came to a stop at a gate marked Yard 46. It was a desolate city of steel, thousands of shipping containers stacked 6 high. Baking in the oppressive afternoon heat, the air tasted of rust and salt water. The gate slid open and we drove into the maze. The car stopped in a small clearing, surrounded on all sides by towering walls of corrugated steel. The door opened. A man was waiting for me. He was in his late 50s, with perfectly coiffed silver hair and a suit that was immaculate despite the grimy surroundings. He was smiling, a predator's smile. He wore pristine white shirt sleeves, and on his hands, a pair of thin, black leather gloves. "Miss Calder," he said, his voice smooth as polished marble. "I'm Dorian Kincaid, Deputy Director of the IIC. I'm so glad we could finally have a private chat." My escorts flanked me, their presence no longer professional, but menacing. Kincaid gestured toward a small folding table set up with a bottle of water and a single chair. "Please, let's be civilized." I didn't sit. "This isn't protection," I said, my voice tight. "On the contrary," he replied, his smile unwavering. "It's the best protection money can buy. I'm here to offer you a deal, a permanent one. You give me the original recording, the real one. Not the clever little copy you sent on a field trip through the courthouse mailroom, and in exchange, you get a new life. Full entry into the Witness Protection Program, a clean slate. I even took the liberty of having your outstanding student loan debt completely erased from the federal system." He paused for effect. "Think of it, Ava. A fresh start, far away from all this ugliness." I stared at him, at the face of the rot that had infected the very institution I'd once respected. And if I refuse... Kincaid's smile vanished. His eyes went flat and cold. He didn't say a word. He simply gestured with his head toward the back of the clearing. Tucked behind a stack of empty pallets was a massive, industrial-grade shredder, its jagged metal teeth caked with grease and bits of unidentifiable debris. It was humming quietly, waiting. It wasn't meant for paper. The threat hung in the hot, still air, more terrifying than any shouted words. Just as the silence stretched to its breaking point, a deafeningly loud train horn blared from the nearby rail spur, making us all jump. In that instant of distraction, the door of the massive blue shipping container directly behind Kincaid slammed open with a deafening bang. Cassian Vale stepped out. Not with a weapon drawn, but with a single piece of paper in his hand. Noor and 2 of his men emerged behind him, silent and ready. Kincaid spun around, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. "Vale, how did you—" "Mr. Kincaid," Cassian said, his voice calm and utterly controlled, cutting through the director's shock. He took a step forward, holding out the document. "This is a citizen's intervention demand, filed 10 minutes ago by the Lantern and Loom Legal Aid Center on behalf of their client, Ava Calder. It cites probable cause for witness tampering and kidnapping under state and federal statutes, and it legally compels you to release Ms. Calder into the custody of her legal counsel or the Civic Hall Marshal Service, effective immediately." It wasn't a rescue with guns. It was an ambush with the law. Kincaid stared at the paper as if it were a snake. "This is preposterous. I have federal jurisdiction. This is a matter of IIC security. Your security detail was seen forcing my client into an unsanctioned vehicle," Cassian countered, his tone icy. "You're operating outside of official channels, Director. And I have a sworn affidavit from a former Port Authority employee detailing the unofficial Pier 7 security allowance you've been personally collecting from the Montclair Syndicate for the last 6 months. Kincaid's professional mask cracked. That allowance is a lie, he snarled, taking a fatal step. He had just admitted knowledge of it. He had fallen into the trap. At that exact moment, a cacophony of alarms erupted throughout the yard. Red lights flashed atop the security poles. All around us, the massive steel barrier arms at the various checkpoints began to rise, one after another. Noor stood behind Cassian, a small tablet in her hand, a faint smile on her lips. She had seized the entire system. Private security guards began running in every direction, their radios crackling with confused shouts. Chaos reigned. In the midst of the mayhem, Cassian looked at me. He held out his hand. I didn't hesitate. I ran from Kincaid's side and grabbed it, his grip strong and sure, pulling me toward a narrow corridor formed by 2 stacks of containers, a pre-planned escape route. "Stop them!" Kincaid shrieked, his composure utterly gone. "Get her back!" His men started to move, but it was too late. A white news van, which must have slipped through one of Noor's opened gates, screeched into the clearing, its side door sliding open. A cameraman leaped out, the bright, harsh light of his camera landing squarely on Dorian Kincaid's enraged, contorted face. He was live. The whole city was watching. I stopped for a second, turning back. The camera swung toward me. I looked directly into the lens, my voice clear and steady, a vow made before the entire city. I will testify. Cassian was beside me, his voice a low, warm whisper in my ear, cutting through the blare of the alarms. "I'll be in the back row," he said, repeating his promise, "and at every fire escape." We disappeared into the steel canyon as the news van strategically maneuvered itself, its bulk physically blocking the path between Kincaid's men and us. The truth was on the air now, a shield more powerful than any gun, holding the wolves at bay. That night, the city's frantic pulse faded to a distant murmur. Noor had relocated me from the functional austerity of the print shop to a new sanctuary, a sprawling loft apartment tucked away on the top floor of a converted warehouse in Silversmith Row. The space was all exposed brick, warm wood floors and tall, arched windows that looked out over a quiet, rain-slicked street. A single warm lamp cast long shadows, turning the cavernous room into an intimate haven. The storm was still raging outside the walls of our fragile peace, but in here, for a few precious hours, there was a lull. I sat on a thick woven rug in the center of the floor, nursing a mug of ginger tea Noor had left for us before discreetly disappearing. The warmth seeped into my hands, but it couldn't quite quell the fine tremor that still vibrated through my body, the lingering echo of fear and adrenaline. Cassian sat on the floor opposite me, his back against the leg of a heavy wooden table. He had taken off his watch, the expensive timepiece that always seemed to tick with the city's urgent rhythm, and placed it on the floor beside him. With that one simple act, he had shed the last vestige of the formidable crime boss. He was just a man, watching me in the soft, yellow light, his own exhaustion etched in the lines around his eyes. We didn't speak for a long time, sharing the quiet space, letting the day's chaos settle. "They'll turn me into a headline," I said finally, my voice sounding small in the big room. "The courageous whistleblower. They'll put my face on television and twist my words until I don't recognize them anymore. I'll stop being a person and just become a story they tell." My deepest fear wasn't of Kincaid or Montclair anymore. It was of being consumed by the very truth I was trying to reveal. He didn't dismiss my fear. He nodded slowly, his gaze thoughtful. "And they'll call me the shadowy kingpin who got lucky," he said, his voice a low rumble. "They'll say I manipulated you, that I used the law as a weapon for my own gain." He looked at his hands, large and capable, and for the first time, they looked helpless. I've spent my life building walls, controlling outcomes, eliminating threats, but I'm afraid of this. He finally looked up, and his eyes were raw with a vulnerability that stole my breath. I'm afraid of losing something I can't protect with force, something I have no right to hold in the first place. He meant me, my safety, my choice, my heart. In that moment, the last wall between us crumbled to dust. I set my mug aside and crawled across the rug. Stopping just before him, the air between us was thick with unspoken words, with the shared trauma of the last few days, with a fragile, burgeoning hope. This was our confirmation of survival, a quiet acknowledgement that we had made it through the fire together. My hand came up to cup his jaw, the slight roughness of his stubble a grounding. Real sensation. He leaned into my touch, his eyes closing for a brief second. When they opened again, they were dark with an emotion I couldn't name, but that I felt mirrored in my own soul. We both leaned in, a slow, magnetic pull, and our lips met. The kiss was a deep, searching thing, a conversation without words. It spoke of fear and relief, of gratitude and a fierce, protective tenderness. His hand came up to cradle the back of my neck, his fingers tangling in my hair, while my own hands explored the solid, reassuring expanse of his shoulders through the fabric of his shirt. I felt the steady, powerful beat of his heart against my palm, a rhythm that seemed to calm the frantic fluttering of my own. I traced the line of his collarbone through the soft cotton, a map of the man who had become my unlikely anchor. He deepened the kiss, a soft groan rumbling in his chest, and for a moment, the world outside, with its threats and deadlines, ceased to exist. There was only the warmth of his skin, the scent of him, the steadying strength of his arms. He pulled back slightly, his forehead resting against mine, his breath warm on my face. His eyes searched mine, asking a question he wouldn't voice, offering me an escape I didn't want. I gave him my answer with a small nod, a silent affirmation. With a shuddering breath, he wrapped his arms around me, pulling me tight against his chest, burying his face in my hair. He just held me, and in the circle of his arms, I felt the tremors finally, blessedly, cease. We stayed like that for a long time, the rain drumming a soft tattoo on the roof above, a rhythm for our synchronized breathing. Later, we lay side by side on the thick rug, my head pillowed on his arm, staring up at the high, shadowed ceiling. After, he whispered into the quiet, we'll spend a whole Sunday in Lockridge Park. We'll find a bench under the big oak tree and read until the sun goes down. And for breakfast, I added, a smile in my voice, we'll go to Cove and Cole. They have these Belgian waffles with lemon curd and powdered sugar. They're life-changing. We built a future out of whispers and simple dreams, a bulwark against the coming dawn. My fingers idly traced the patterns on his arm, and I felt it a raised, jagged line of scar tissue on his forearm, hidden beneath his sleeve. I paused, my touch gentle. He didn't pull away. An old argument with a gas line, he said, his voice quiet. The apartment next to my mother's place, back in Block 19. A kid was trapped on the third-floor fire escape, too scared to move. He didn't need to elaborate. I could picture it him, not the crime boss, but the boy from the old neighborhood, choosing to run toward a fire to save a child. It was a piece of his history that explained everything about him. The buzz of his phone on the floor was a harsh intrusion. He sighed and picked it up. It was a text from Noor. His body tensed as he read it. Kincaid's flipped, he said, his voice flat and hard. He's offering to give the feds everything he has on Montclair in exchange for a plea deal and immunity. The fragile peace shattered. Kincaid wasn't just going to be exposed, he was going to try to rewrite the story, paint himself as a hero, and walk away free. A cold fury, clear and sharp, rose inside me. I stared at the ceiling, my resolve hardening into a steel beam. Tomorrow, I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. Tomorrow, on that stand, I will name every single name I heard on that tape. He turned his head, his gaze intense. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out something that glinted in the dim light. It was a simple, delicate silver chain. I had Noor pick this up, he said softly. He sat up and gently fastened it around my neck. It wasn't a collar, not a claim of ownership. It was a marker, a promise. "So you always have a way back," he murmured, his fingers brushing against my skin. I lifted my hand and brought his knuckles to my lips, kissing the scar that spoke more about his character than any rumor ever could. We set 3 alarms, a practical concession to the importance of the day to come. We fell asleep on the rug, tangled together under his suit coat, his hand holding mine, not with the force of a captor, but with the gentle, steadfast grip of a partner. In the soft light from the window, our 2 shadows on the exposed brick wall merged into one. The city outside seemed to shrink, its roar muted. For the first time in a long time, there was no violence in my world, only a profound sense of peace. I dreamt of a courtroom with no shouting, only the quiet rustle of paper. And beside me, Cassian, for the first time in his life, dreamt of an ocean he had never seen. Dawn arrived, pale and gray, to start the fateful day. The air in Courtroom C was not just full, it was pressurized. The live television feed had turned this preliminary hearing into the biggest show in town. Every seat was taken. Reporters lined the walls, their pens poised, a digital chorus of cameras clicking, capturing every flicker of an eye. After Kincaid's spectacular, nationally televised meltdown at Yard 46, this was no longer a hearing about an arson case. It was a trial of the system itself. We were barely seated before Kincaid's new lawyer, a high-priced crisis management specialist, was on his feet. "Your Honor," he announced, his voice a smooth, confident balm. "My client, Deputy Director Kincaid, wishes to make a full statement. He has been acting in a deep-cover capacity to expose the insidious reach of the Montclair Syndicate, and he is now prepared to offer his full, unmitigated cooperation." A ripple of shock went through the room, and he was trying to spin it, to paint himself as the hero, the lone warrior cleaning up the city. He was turning his own kidnapping of me into a brave sting operation. "Mr. Abernathy shot to his feet. "Objection, this is a blatant attempt to hijack these proceedings and taint the witness. My client has yet to finish her testimony." "Well, Mr. Abernathy is correct," I said, my voice cutting through the lawyer's posturing. All eyes snapped to me. I looked directly at Judge Shaw. "Your Honor, Mr. Kincaid has already offered me his deal. I request permission to continue my testimony. In order, I believe a clear, chronological account of the facts will be most beneficial to this court." Judge Shaw's eyes, sharp and intelligent, narrowed at Kincaid, then at me. "Your request is granted, Miss Calder. Proceed. And counsel," she added, glaring at Kincaid's lawyer, "you will sit down." I took a breath. The silver chain Cassian had given me a cool, steady weight beneath my blouse. "My testimony yesterday was interrupted. I will resume from the moment I left this courthouse for the lunch recess." And I laid it all out, every piece, fitting together with the cold precision of the machines at Moonletter Press. I spoke of the polite, professional IIC agents who intercepted me, the official government sedan, the unscheduled turn toward the port, the click of the central locks, the desolate container yard. I described Dorian Kincaid, not as a desperate man, but as a confident executive, offering me a trade my silence for my life, my original recording for the erasure of my debts. I described the industrial shredder and the quiet, humming threat it represented. "Mr. Kincaid did not act like a man running a sting operation," I said, my voice steady. "He acted like a man who was angry he had been caught, trying to destroy the last piece of evidence against him. He was only cooperating when Mr. Vale and Miss Ilias arrived with a legal demand for my release." "Objection," Kincaid's lawyer was up again. "She's characterizing she has no knowledge of the director's motives." "Sustained," Judge Shaw said. "The witness will stick to the facts." "The facts, Mr. Abernathy said, stepping forward, "are these. While my client was being held against her will, my firm, acting on a verified tip, was unsealing a series of offshore accounts." He placed a stack of documents on the projector. We have here invoices for Pier 7 security logistics, totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars, paid by a known Montclair shell corporation. They are electronically signed by an account that our forensic team has traced directly to a private fund controlled by Deputy Director Kincaid. The courtroom was silent. Cashin's bluff at the container yard had been true. Marcus Thorne, Montclair's lawyer, exploded. He must have realized that Kincaid's only escape was to pin everything, the bribes, the arson, everything on him. This is an outrage. My client has been extorted by a corrupt federal official. We are a legitimate logistics business. Your Honor, forced to pay security fees to operate at the port. We had nothing to do with that fire. A logistics business that moves what exactly, Mr. Thorne? Abernathy asked quietly. Thorne's face went purple. He had just admitted to the payments. Your Honor, Abernathy continued, to verify the authenticity of this digital chain of evidence, from the library servers to these offshore accounts, I would like to call a consulting technical expert. The court grants it, Judge Shaw said, her face grim. The defense calls Noor Ilyas. Noor walked to the stand as if she were walking into a boardroom. She was calm, professional, and utterly confident. She wore a simple gray suit, her hair pulled back. She was sworn in. For 20 minutes, she gave a master class in cybersecurity. She spoke of checksums, server redundancy, IP masking, and encrypted signature keys. She explained, in simple, irrefutable terms, how the audio file from the library was a perfect, unaltered copy, and how the digital signature on the invoices was as unique and binding as Kincaid's own fingerprint. She never once mentioned the Veil Circle. She was just a private cybersecurity consultant, contracted by Lantern and Loom. She was brilliant. I watched her, a fierce surge of gratitude swelling in my chest. My eyes found the back row. Cassian was sitting perfectly still, an anonymous face in the crowd. As I concluded my own final statement, I looked back at the judge. I am only alive, and this evidence is only here, because of the help of people who are not named on any official record, people who acted when the ones who were on the record tried to silence me. I saw it, Cashin's eyes, just for a fraction of a second, warmed. Kincaid's lawyer knew he was beaten, but he had one last card to play. He rose for his cross-examination of me. Miss Calder, he sneered, you speak of these unnamed helpers. Are you aware that the consultant who just testified, Miss Ilyas, and the man who orchestrated that media circus at Yard 46 Cashin Vale are the heads of a known and violent criminal organization? The air was sucked from the room. This was it. The question designed to link me to the underworld, to invalidate everything I'd said. I met his gaze. I didn't flinch. I'm aware that I was kidnapped yesterday by a deputy director of the Interstate Integrity Commission. I am aware that he threatened to have me put through an industrial shredder. I am aware that the people who saved me used a legal document, filed with this very court, to do it. I have a relationship with the Truth Council, and the truth does not wear a badge. The gallery erupted. Reporters were shouting. Judge Shaw hammered her gavel, her face a mask of thunder. Order, order in this court. When the room finally fell silent, she spoke, her voice shaking with controlled fury. This court has heard enough. Based on the testimony of this witness and the verified evidence, I am finding sufficient probable cause of widespread corruption, witness tampering, and obstruction of justice within the IIC's handling of this case. She looked at my new protectors. Full protective custody of Miss Calder is hereby transferred to the Oriole County Citizens Guarantee Commission. The IIC and its affiliates are barred from any and all contact with this witness, pending a full federal investigation. She then turned her gaze on Kincaid. As for your cooperation, Mr. Kincaid, this court sees only a desperate attempt to escape accountability. Bailiffs, take this man into custody on charges of kidnapping, coercion, and obstruction of justice. It was like watching a skyscraper collapse in slow motion. Kincaid's face, the mask of the smooth, untouchable official, crumbled. His skin went a sickly gray. He didn't say a word as the marshals cuffed him and led him, stumbling, out of the courtroom. The system was finally eating its own. Thorne, seeing his primary adversary and his only scapegoat simultaneously removed from the board, went into a panic. "This is a mistrial," he shouted, jumping to his feet. "A circus. This entire proceeding is tainted. We are withdrawing." He began stuffing files into his briefcase, a desperate, childish attempt to simply make it all stop. The Civic Hall marshals moved as one, their large frames blocking the exits. Their message was clear: no one was leaving. In the back row, I saw Cassian, who had been an island of calm, suddenly go rigid, his hand resting on his knee, clenched. He hadn't looked up, but I knew that subtle shift. The burner phone in my pocket vibrated once. A confirmation. He had gotten a message. His eyes, almost imperceptibly, flicked upward to the high, north-facing windows of the courtroom. A sniper. Noor, who had returned to her seat in the gallery, saw his minute reaction. She stood up instantly, accidentally sweeping a large, heavy glass pitcher of water from the press table. It shattered on the floor, sending water and glass shards everywhere. Reporters leaped back, cursing. In that brief, chaotic instant, as all eyes turned to the commotion, I saw Cassian incline his head one single sharp degree toward the windows, a signal to his team. His gaze then found mine. Just for a second, and it was a solid wall of invisible steel. He had it handled. "Order!" Judge Shaw roared, pounding her gavel. "Mr. Thorne, you will sit down, or you will be held in contempt. This hearing is concluded." She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of profound respect. This court finds probable cause to move to a full criminal trial to begin next week, M.S. The audio recording, having been fully authenticated, is hereby unsealed and released to the public record. I let out a breath I'd been holding since I first pressed the record button on that cheap device. It wasn't over, but this was one. In the back row, Cassian stood up, and he didn't look at me. He didn't wait for the crowd. He simply turned and melted into the throng of people pushing for the doors, a shadow disappearing to secure the perimeter. The new marshals from the Oriole Commission, their badges a different color, their faces unknown and professional, surrounded me. "This way, Miss Calder," one said, his voice kind. They guided me through a side door, into the same hallway where I'd been warned. This time, it was different. It wasn't empty. It was filled with courthouse staff, clerks and citizens who had been watching from the overflow room. As I passed, they began to applaud. Then someone shouted, "Let her speak," and others picked it up, a growing chant. I wasn't Witness 07 anymore. I was Ava Calder, and I knew, with a sudden, dizzying certainty, that my life as a nobody was over forever. The week between the hearing and the full trial was a blur of depositions, legal strategy sessions with Mr. Abernathy, and long, quiet nights in the Silversmith Row loft. The city buzzed with my name. I was no longer a ghost. I was a symbol, and the weight of it was heavier than any law book. The night before the final day of the trial, the night before the jury would be sent to deliberate, the fragile peace of our sanctuary was shattered. Noor arrived just after midnight, her face grim, her usual crisp energy replaced by a cold, coiled tension. She carried a tablet displaying a series of intercepted, heavily encrypted messages. "It's Montclair's endgame," she said, her voice low. "They're calling it the final curtain call. They've planted a small, non-lethal explosive device in a sub-basement utility tunnel beneath the courthouse. It's not designed to bring the building down. It's designed to trigger a full-scale emergency evacuation, create chaos. In that chaos, they're men, posing as first responders, grab you." The plan was audacious, desperate, and terrifyingly plausible. They were going to snatch me from the heart of the justice system itself. Cassian, who'd been watching the city lights from one of the tall, arched windows, turned. He showed no surprise, no fear. His face was a mask of cold calculation. He listened as Noor detailed the plan, his stillness a terrifying counterpoint to the violent plot she described. When she was finished, He didn't speak for a full minute. The only sound was the rain beginning to tap against the glass. "They've left me no choice," he said finally, his voice dangerously quiet. He turned to Noor. "Prepare the package, the full unredacted server data. Everything. Send it to Abernathy at Lantern and Loom, now." I stared at him, my blood running cold for a different reason. The package was the core of the Vale Circle's operations. Not just their legitimate businesses, but everything. Their networks, their confidential sources, their financial weak points. It was the kind of data that could bring down his entire empire. It was organizational suicide. "No," I said, getting to my feet. "Cassian, you can't. That's everything. You'll be exposed. They'll use it against you. You can't sacrifice yourself like this, not for me." He finally looked at me, and his eyes were filled with a weary resolve. "This isn't for you, Ava," he said. And the words, though gentle, hit me like a physical blow. This is because this city needs one bad man to know when to stop. Montclair and Kincaid believe there are no lines. They'll burn the whole building down to win. I'm going to prove them wrong. By giving Abernathy that data, we're not just giving him leverage against Montclair, we're giving him leverage against me. It's an act of faith. It makes us the transparent party. It will force the system to see this isn't a war between two gangs. It's a choice between chaos and a different kind of order. "An order you control," I shot back, my voice rising. For the first time, I was angry at him. "This isn't about ethics, it's about strategy. You're using the law, using me, to eliminate a rival." The accusation hung in the air, ugly and raw. His face hardened. "Is that what you think this is a game?" "Isn't it?" I cried. My hands clenched into fists. "You move people like pieces on a map. You have snipers and safe houses, and you talk about sacrifice as if it's just another business decision." The anger flared between us, hot and fierce. It was the collision of two different worlds, my black and white world of legal statutes and due process, and his gray world of necessary evils and strategic sacrifices. Then, just as quickly as it had erupted, the fire went out of me. I saw his hand resting on the back of a chair, and it was trembling, a slight, almost imperceptible tremor. But it was there. The invincible man, the unshakable commander, was afraid. Not of Montclair, not of the law. He was afraid of losing this, of losing me. He was afraid I saw him as a monster. My anger dissolved, replaced by a wave of profound, aching tenderness. I crossed the space between us and put my hands on his chest. "I'm sorry," I whispered. I'm so scared for you." He wrapped his arms around me, pulling me into a fierce, desperate embrace. His body was rigid with tension. "They will not touch you," he growled into my hair. "I don't care what it costs." We stood by the window, the city lights a waterfall of distant stars behind us. He held me as if he were trying to memorize the feel of me, to absorb my safety into his very bones. It wasn't gentle, it was raw, a desperate clinging in the face of the abyss. He kissed me, a kiss that tasted of fear and resolve and a love that was forged in fire. "Tomorrow," he whispered, his forehead pressed against mine. "If you feel yourself start to tremble on that stand, you look to the back row. I'll be there, and I will not let you fall." The next morning, the courthouse was a fortress. My new protective detail from the Oriole Commission was professional and efficient, but as they led me through a secure corridor, a bailiff I didn't recognize handed me an envelope. "From the Chief Marshal's office," he said. "Emergency evacuation protocols, in case of a disruption." Inside was a diagram of the courthouse, with a route marked in red. My heart pounded. I showed it to Noor, who had materialized at my side, posing as a paralegal for Mr. Abernathy. She glanced at it for less than a second. "The route leads directly past the sub-basement access corridor," she said, her voice a low murmur. "It's the trap." She crumpled the paper in her hand. "We'll be taking the scenic route." The trial began. Montclair's last-ditch effort was a surprise witness, a former low-level clerk who claimed he'd seen me meeting with known Vale associates weeks before the fire, implying I was part of a conspiracy to frame Montclair from the beginning. He was slick, plausible, and well-rehearsed. But he made one mistake. On cross-examination, Mr. Abernathy asked him to describe the day he allegedly saw me. "It was a Tuesday," the man said confidently, "the day the preliminary docket for the Harrison case was filed. I remember because the file folders were bright blue." I leaned forward and whispered to Mr. Abernathy. He smiled faintly. "Sir," Abernathy said to the witness, "are you aware that the Harrison case files were color-coded red until the 3rd of the month, at which point, due to a clerical error, they were switched to green? They have never, in the history of this courthouse, been blue." The witness stammered, his face paling. He had been fed a detail that sounded right but was fundamentally wrong. My intimate, boring, day-to-day knowledge of the courthouse's inner workings, the kind of knowledge you only get from cleaning its floors and filing its papers, had just dismantled their lie. The small details always kill the big lies. It was in that moment of stunned silence that the alarm bells began to shriek, a piercing, deafening wail. The emergency lights kicked on, bathing the courtroom in a strobing, hellish red. "Fire alarm! Everyone evacuate!" a marshal shouted. Panic erupted, but it was a controlled chaos. The marshals began directing the flow of people. I saw a group of reporters and public spectators, who had clearly been given the same fake map, being herded by Montclair's men in their fake uniforms toward the exit that led to the basement. Nor spoke into her wrist. Now. Heavy steel shutters slammed down, sealing off that corridor. On the security monitors, we could see the hallway fill with thick, white smoke from a theatrical smoke device. Montclair's team, caught on a dozen high-definition cameras, looked around in confusion, their prey gone, their traps sprung on themselves. "Your Honor," the prosecutor yelled over the din, "I move to add charges of conspiracy to commit an act of domestic terrorism." In the defendant's box, Kincaid, seeing his last hope of a deal evaporate, pulled out a cell phone. He made a desperate, whispered call. I was too far away to hear, but I saw the look of terror on his face. He was calling his real boss, the higher-up, who had been pulling his strings all along. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that Noor was recording every word. The alarms were still screaming. I felt a sudden, inexplicable chill, a raising of the hairs on my arms. I looked toward the high windows on the east side of the courtroom. Was it a glint of light, a reflection? I didn't have time to process. In the back row, Cassian was already moving. He didn't run. He flowed. He launched himself from his seat and crossed the aisle in 2 silent, impossibly fast strides, placing his body directly in the line of sight between me and the east window. He never drew a weapon. He simply became a human shield. Crack! The sound was like a whip snapping next to my ear. A cloud of white dust exploded from the marble column just behind the witness stand. Not 2 feet from my head, marshals screamed, "Sniper, get down!" They tackled the shooter's spotter in the gallery as other units swarmed the roof. I was frozen, staring at the new, ugly crater in the polished marble. I looked back to the gallery, my heart in my throat. Cassian was already back in his seat, his face a mask of utter calm, as if he had just been adjusting his coat. Our eyes met across the chaotic room. He was there. He had not let me fall. The terror that had seized me receded, replaced by the steadying certainty of his presence. Judge Shaw, who had ducked behind her massive dais, rose, her face pale but resolute. "This trial is over," she declared, her voice booming through the dying wail of the alarms. "This court has seen and heard more than enough. The jury will be sequestered to deliver a verdict on the charges presented, and this new evidence of conspiracy and attempted murder will be addressed in a subsequent, separate trial." I sank back into the witness chair, my body trembling, and took a deep, shuddering breath. The stage was set. The final knot had been tied. All that was left was for the blade to fall. On the day of the verdict, Crownwell held its breath under a sky of impossible, brilliant blue. The city had been weeping rain for what felt like an eternity. But today, the sun was a stark, unblinking eye. Civic Square was a living sea of people. Their faces turned toward the granite steps of the Hall of Justice. I walked through them, the navy blazer my familiar armor, each step a conscious decision, a final affirmation of the choice I had made that first rainy night. I didn't look for him, but I could feel his presence. Cassian wasn't inside. He stood on the far edge of the square, a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes, just another anonymous figure in a restless crowd. He was there not to intimidate or to interfere, but to watch, to be the silent anchor he had promised to be. The courtroom was a study in tension. The jury filed in, their faces pale and grim, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. Kincaid and the remaining Montclair lieutenants sat at the defendant's table, their bravado gone, replaced by a brittle, desperate stillness. Before the jury foreperson could stand, Mr. Abernathy rose. "Your Honor," he said, his voice ringing with quiet authority, "new evidence has come to light that is pertinent to the sentencing phase. We were provided by an anonymous source deeply troubled by the systemic corruption in this city, with the unredacted server logs from the Interstate Integrity Commission." He placed a thick binder on the prosecutor's table. It was Cassian's sacrifice, his ultimate act of faith, now being entered into the official record. These logs detail years of communication, illicit payments, and doctored reports. Abernathy continued. They not only corroborate every aspect of my client's testimony, but also implicate a dozen other officials, including, we were disturbed to learn, the federal source who authorized the FCSD's retaliatory audit of my firm. The game was over. Cassian hadn't just given them a weapon against Montclair, he had given them the keys to the entire corrupt kingdom, including the parts that could have led back to him. He had trusted the system he so often worked outside of. Judge Shaw read the verdict. Her voice was clear, steady and merciless. Guilty, on all counts. The word echoed through the silent courtroom. Again and again, Montclair's men were guilty of arson, conspiracy, and attempted murder. Dorian Kincaid was guilty of kidnapping, obstruction of justice, and a dozen other corruption charges. The IIC was to be placed under immediate federal oversight. As the judge spoke, a low cheer began to build from the crowd outside in the square, a sound that grew into a roar, the sound of a city finally exhaling. As the bailiffs moved to cuff the defendants, the last remaining Montclair capo, a man named Russo, made his final, desperate move. He gave a sharp nod to his men scattered in the gallery. It wasn't about escape. It was about revenge. As everyone rose, creating a surge of movement, they activated their Plan B. Their goal was to create a stampede in the Grand Central Hall outside the courtroom and drag me into a waiting car during the panic. Men began to shove, to shout. People stumbled, cried out in alarm. It was chaos. Amid the surge, a hand clamped down on my arm like a steel trap. It was Russo. He began to drag me toward the doors, his face a mask of feral rage. But I was not the same woman he had tried to intimidate in the library. As he pulled, I didn't struggle against his strength. I remembered Noor's patient instruction in the loft. Use their momentum. Never fight force with force. I dropped my weight, twisting my wrist sharply downward in a way that broke his grip. As he stumbled off balance, I drove my elbow hard into the side of his knee. He roared in pain and surprise, his leg buckling. I was free. Before he could recover, another of his men was on me, but he never reached me. A heavy, wheeled cart laden with thick legal binders came careening out of a service corridor, slamming into the man and pinning him against a wall. It was a perfectly executed, non-violent intervention. Cassian emerged from the corridor, his face grim, his movements fluid. He had been listening, waiting. Russo, seeing his plan disintegrate, let out a guttural cry of fury. He pulled a knife from his jacket and lunged, not at me, but at Cassian. Cassian didn't flinch. He didn't retreat. He stood his ground, a calm, immovable object in the swirling chaos. He moved to intercept the blade, but it was fast. The knife's edge sliced across his upper arm, tearing through the fabric of his shirt. A thin, dark line appeared on the white cotton. It wasn't a deep cut, but it was a wound taken for me. He didn't even grunt. He simply stood there, his eyes locked on Russo, his presence an absolute denial of the man's violence. The world seemed to slow, the shouts and screams fading to a dull roar. The marshals were closing in, but all I could see was Cassian, standing between me and the blade, bleeding for me. I moved to his side, my hand coming up to cup his face, my thumb stroking his cheek, his eyes, which had been chips of ice, softened as they met mine. They were filled with a fierce, unwavering devotion. "Don't you dare look away from me," I whispered, my voice thick with tears I refused to let fall. He leaned down, his lips brushing against my ear, and the sounds of the chaos around us disappeared completely. He whispered the words that had become our foundation, our creed. "I'll be in the back row." This time, it wasn't a promise for a courtroom. It was a vow for a lifetime. In every room, in every crisis, in every quiet moment, he would be there, my protector, my partner, my home. The marshals swarmed Russo and his men, subduing them with professional efficiency. Nor was suddenly there, a first aid kit in her hand, her expression a mixture of fury and relief. As she began to clean and bandage Cassian's arm, he never took his eyes off me. He held out his uninjured hand, and I took it. Lacing my fingers through his, I squeezed, a firm, steady pressure, a signal not of fear, but of strength. "I'm okay, we're okay." When we finally walked out of the courthouse, the brilliant blue sky had softened. A gentle, cleansing rain had begun to fall, just like the rain on that very first night. The roar of the crowd was deafening. A reporter shoved a microphone in my face. Ava, what do you have to say to the city?" I looked out at the sea of faces, at the ordinary people who had hoped and feared alongside me. I thought of the corrupt officials, the violent men, the entire rotten system we had exposed. "The ordinary people won today," I said, my voice clear and strong. Cassian stood just behind my shoulder, out of the glare of the camera lights, letting me have my moment. He was a shadow of safety, his gaze fixed not on the cameras, but on the horizon, on the city that was finally beginning to heal. In the weeks that followed, the city began to breathe again, lantern and loom, flush with new funding and public support, signed a formal partnership with the Oriole County Citizens Guarantee Commission to oversee systemic reforms, and the Veil Circle, in a quiet, unprecedented move, publicly divested from two of its most notorious gray market enterprises, and published a new internal charter, a code of conduct that, while still existing in the shadows, drew clear, new lines in the sand. We have a small, framed print hanging on the brick wall of the Moonletter Press now. It just says, "Truth print slow," but it doesn't smudge. I often sit at the old wooden table, working on intake files for Mr. Abernathy, helping other people lost in the system find their voice. And sometimes I'll look up and see Cassian sitting in a worn armchair in the corner of the workshop, reading over a document, a quiet smile on his face. He's still a man of shadows, but he is my shadow. He is my peace. He sits, as he always will, in the back row of my life, a silent, steadfast guardian, the whisper that became a vow. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to see where you're all tuning in from, so please comment below with where you're listening and share your thoughts. Make sure to subscribe to my channel, Mafia Boss Stories, and like this video. And if you really enjoyed it, please consider hitting that hype button to help this story reach more people. Your support means the world.